Good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. My name is Alden Landry. I'm an associate professor of emergency medicine at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and the assistant dean for diversity, inclusion, and community partnership here at Harvard Medical School. I want to welcome you all today for today's session. We're going to be hosting another one of our equity and social justice lecture series, this time with a focus on our LGBTQIA community with a discussion around mental health, well-being, and resilience. Panelists today will share suggested best practices for LGBTQIA staff, faculty, and trainees, both here at HMS and all across the country, and ways to optimize well-being and resilience in this very challenging social and political environment. The webinar will focus on how all members can serve as effective allies for the LGBTQIA people. This webinar is sponsored by the Harvard Medical School Office for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Partnership. The DICP's mission is to advance diversity and inclusion in health, biomedical, behavioral, and STEM fields in ways that build individual and institutional capacity to achieve excellence, to foster innovation, and to ensure health locally, nationally, and globally. DICP efforts support career development of junior faculty, trainees, and students, identify and train leaders in academic medicine and health policy, and provide programs that address crucial pipeline issues. This webinar, as you can see, is part of our annual lecture series through the Equity and Social Justice Initiative, which was established to address issues related to health disparities, social determinants of health, leadership and health systems, as well as health policy and other areas affecting vulnerable populations. Before we get started, there's a couple housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our DICP website. Chat is not available and microphones will be muted except for the panelist.
Next slide.
We will have captioning, closed captioning available by request. To view captioning on your screen, click the show captions icon at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, click on the more icons, choose captions, and click show captions. If you are still having trouble, send a message through the Q&A and we'll try and assist you as best as possible. If you would like to engage with our panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A function to pose questions to our panelists. We will try and have some time towards the end of our presentation for questions that you may have. Next slide. So I'd like to take a pause here and allow everyone to read this slide. This is to remind everyone that HMS is a mutually supportive community, and please take a moment to review this slide. And before we jump into introductions of our panelists, I just want to recognize a loss that the Harvard community experienced yesterday, as well as the community, the country at large. Dr. Alvin Poussant passed away yesterday at the age of 90. He served here at Harvard Medical School in various leadership roles, including the founding of the Office for Recruitment and Multicultural Affairs, which he led for almost 50 years. He was a civil rights icon, a psychiatrist by training, and really helped to shape a lot of the discussions around the civil rights movement, as well as the Black community. There was an amazing write-up on him that was published in the New York Times that you can read. But just want to recognize the loss that we all are experiencing, and we want to send prayers to his family, to those who knew him well, because he's such a huge person, and his loss will surely be felt by many. Next slide. So now I have the pleasure of introducing today's moderator, Dr. Alex Karuglian. Alex is an associate professor of psychiatry here at Harvard Medical School, director of the Education and Training Program at the Fenway Institute, and the director of the Michael and Howard J. Kessel Chair of Public Community Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Karuglian established the MGH Psychiatry Gender Identity Program and is clerkship director for 2 senior electives in sexual and gender minority health at HMS. They also co-direct HMS Sexual and Gender Minority Health Equity Initiative, which leads the longitudinal medical curriculum and faculty development in LGBTQIA health. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Alex. Thank you for moderating today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Landry, and a big thank you to Harvard Medical School's DICP for organizing this event, and to Robin Kane for putting this all together and making sure that this could be a reality. I'm also personally very saddened to learn of Dr. Poussin's loss. He was a wonderful man. I had many personal, very special conversations with him, and was a fierce champion of LGBTQI plus students and all marginalized students at our medical school. So his loss is felt. I'm delighted to be here with you all today to moderate this very important and compelling panel. We have 3 wonderful speakers and panelists whom you'll hear from in a moment, who are really the stars of this show. And just want to start by providing some context. We were eager to do a webinar in collaboration with HMS's DICP to focus on the mental health, well-being, and resilience of LGBTQI plus students, trainees, staff across our Harvard Medical School system and affiliates in the context of rising challenges, hostility, and barriers to being an LGBTQI plus person in this world, to focusing on LGBTQI plus health professionally, which all of us who study and work here do. And I personally was eager to, and have been eager to learn from colleagues who have a lot of experience and wisdom in this area. So we have 3 wonderful psychiatrists within our Harvard Medical School system who've generously agreed to participate and share their thoughts, who are terrific educators, clinicians, and colleagues. So I think we're all in for a treat today.
Next slide.
And we're going to hear from the 3 folks shown here: Dr. Chelsea Costner, who's at Mass General Hospital and a child and adolescent psychiatrist in our gender identity program; Dr. Carrie Kroll, who's Associate Medical Director of our MGH Gender Identity Program and Medical Director for Headway; and Dr. Cecil Webster, who's a lecturer in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and in the Department of Psychiatry at McLean Hospital, as well as being on the Board of Trustees of the Boston Psychoanalytic Society and Institute. I couldn't think of 3 better panelists for today's topic. So with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Chelsea Costner.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I wanted to thank everybody for coming out today, for organizing this, and also just colleagues in the Gender Identity Program and Trans Health Program. Next slide, please. So, I think it's really heartening that there are so many people here today. There's, over 100 people here, and, Robin, who organized this, mentioned that this is a really good turnout for this event and for this series. And I think it just speaks to how many people are focused on protecting our well-being, focusing on resiliency and our mental health, as LGBTQIA plus people and as allies for this community during these times where there might be a lot of fear and anxiety. And as people working in the HMS system, I think we're all here because we're helpers and have wanted to have careers in helping others. And just sort of taking a step back and focusing on that, we're a community where we keep each other safe in the LGBTQIA plus community. And I think that's something to really remember and to focus on, the idea of community care. And going off of that, I want to go to my next slide. So next slide, please. Thinking about how we keep each other safe, particularly for people who maybe even more at risk or feeling more scared or frightened in the LGBTQIA plus community. Maybe transgender people who might be feeling particularly called out, people who are Black, Indigenous, people of color who might be feeling particularly targeted during these times. How can we really move from being allies to co-conspirators, and really think about this concept of community care to build resilience personally as well as more largely? And what does that really look like? So maybe previously as an ally, we might be, just sort of doing what's respectful, right? Like using people's correct pronouns. Maybe we have a pride flag on our water bottle, to moving towards being more of an accomplice. And, I'm speaking not just to the people who are part of the greater LGBTQIA plus community here, but allies as well, and people for different aspects there. So being an accomplice might look more like if you have a young person in your life who is trans, going to PFLAG meetings, so going to meetings to help figure out ways to support the trans young person in your life, or just showing up a little bit more. And then even the next step, being a co-conspirator. What does that really look like? Taking more political action during these times, maybe signing up for a petition, putting more risk on yourself to support others. That might mean like, if there is a coworker who may be misgendering someone, and you're able to speak to the coworker if they're comfortable with it, talking to them like, hey, that's not okay, that's not what we do there. And again, just checking in with your coworker who's being misgendered, if that's something comfortable with there, or if there's another young person in your life who you're noticing is getting called out more, moving from, again, taking more risk on to yourself to do this. And why is this part of mental health, resilience, and well-being? Because when we feel like we are taking more onto ourselves and doing more for our community, we can grow some of that resilience and then feel better about ourselves and better about the community we're serving. Next slide, please. And these concepts are concepts that sort of taking on from different Black scholars, queer scholars, and thinking of scholars like Dean Spade and the concept of mutual aid, Zach Norris, Tiffany Jana. And these are different resources that people can get involved in locally, nationally. So the Trevor Project, Trans Lifeline are both national resources that help support LGBTQIA plus youth who might be struggling with mental health and suicidal thoughts. There are a bunch of great programs for schools where LGBTQIA plus youth might need additional supports during these times. Listen and TSCR are more local or more national organizations, where Massachusetts does have its own more local programming. Fenway is a great local resource for taking care of LGBTQIA plus youth and adults as well. There are more particular local resources for youth in general that have great programming for young people and adults. And then if people want to stay more abreast of legal changes that might be coming, or just be more aware of their rights, trans equality, as well as the Massachusetts programming is something to be aware of. And if there are maybe young trans people in people's life, the Family Acceptance Project and the Greater Boston PFLAGs are great ways to find out more about supporting trans youth in people's lives. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of my cat Ziggy, and I am just putting this here to ask people to think a little bit about rest and the concept of resiliency and mental health and care. I think a lot of the time we think about self-care and rest as sort of a individual thing. And Ziggy loves to rest. She sleeps like 12 hours a day, and she's young here, but I want people to sort of think a little differently about how they might conceptualize self-care is not necessarily, going on Amazon and getting a, $1 face mask that's single use. And, everybody does that from time to time, but thinking about self-care is something we do as a group, right? So maybe organizing a queer picnic event, going to your local lesbian bookshop or bar, if that's something that's accessible to you, and really trying to build community. Because going back to the first slide, when we are able to come together, that's where we're able to really feel more supported, build on our resources or resiliency, and keep each other safer. And from a health perspective, from a mental health perspective, and build that resiliency. Next slide, please. So this is a QR code. This is just sharing some of the resources from earlier. And that's just a sampling of some of the organizations that people might feel motivated to get involved with after this. I think it's a great way to channel energy that people might be feeling in terms of fear and anxiety when we're able to utilize some of that angst that we're feeling into something more constructive. I think that's really some of the first steps to healing together and building a lot of those stepping stones for mental health. So thank you so much. And I will hand it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. So Chelsea and I work together in the gender identity program at Mass General. I really respect their work. They work with kids and families and adolescents, doing really the hard nitty-gritty work that is so crucial to our community and the most vulnerable people within our community. And I'm hoping I can add on to some of these really tangible recommendations by just adding some stories, some narrative to some of these common experiences that we're facing as we face this time of, it does feel, it's not unprecedented oppression, but it feels unprecedented in terms of the directionality of it all. Feeling like we had such progress as a community, that things were moving forward, and to have to face backwards is a really different challenge than being in a position of oppression, looking forward to more freedom and liberation, but tolerating that oppression in the moment. So I think that's a unique challenge that we're all kind of figuring out how we're going to face today. So my experience that I can draw in, it comes from a few places. I myself am a queer person, and I've had the opportunity over my time at Mass General and the Gender Identity Program to hear hundreds of queer stories. I have this opportunity to meet with patients who are seeking gender affirming surgery, also patients who are seeking medication management and other mental health support as they go through struggles, many of them related to oppression from their gender identity, and some of it completely independent of that. I was very glad to hear Dr. Poussant's work acknowledged at the beginning of this session. I've been thinking about him this week. One thing that's notable about his career is that his public voice really started to take form in the 70s. And that was a time when there was a reaction to some of the great civil rights gains of the African American community in the 60s. And he was really a voice in that time of kind of reactionary response from people who are enemies to the movement. And it's a time that I think we're also experiencing now in the LGBT community. Spent a lot of time on his couch. He was a lovely man. He inspired me. He was always one to push you towards a little bit of good trouble, and really provided a home for the LGBT students when I got to Harvard Medical School. When I got there, I think my class, we had 4 of us who were out of the closet. And by the time I graduated, it was a fifth of the class, kind of tenfold. And it was really due to the work of Dr. Poussin and others in the ORMA office with recruitment and trying to bring in a welcoming environment for queer students on campus. I was reflecting on my own experiences of oppression and thinking back to my college years. So right before I got to medical school, I went to a really religious and non-affirming university. And a lot of the things that our current administration is trying to do to the queer community, and specifically trans and gender diverse people right now, feel familiar to me of things I experienced in my college years. There were direct affronts on our ability to identify with our queer identities and find queer peers. It was really common on my campus that you weren't allowed to say that you were gay. You had to say that you struggled with or dealt with same gender attraction. This is an Orwellian thing that was going on, where it was trying to make this idea prevalent and commonplace that your queer identity really wasn't an identity. It was something you experienced akin to a temptation or an addiction. And this was really the framework that was being pushed to try to understand queerness on campus. They tried to divide us against one another. There was a policy where you were held accountable if you didn't report others in your community who you knew were violating the campus policies, that you too could be then come under condemnation for not reporting a friend who might not be behaving in line with the kind of restrictive policies of the campus. And I saw that really tear apart friend groups and make people suspicious of one another, and really it instituted a policy of self-policing that was difficult for us to navigate. The other thing I saw is that we still found a way to have fun and to love each other regardless. When I was a senior on my campus, we started a university club that we had to call Understanding Same Gender Attraction, USGA, but really we knew it was the university's Sexuality and Gender Alliance. We had all these different rules. We weren't allowed to meet in the same building or at the same time. So we made it a game and trying to kind of create a pop-up atmosphere of where the next club meeting would be. And we grew to over 600 members attending this by the time we graduated. I say this to say, you know, although this feels unprecedented, we have experience in our community of times that were similar that we can draw on when we think about how do we want to respond to this current moment that is being pushed upon us by our administration. When I got to Harvard Medical School, I really benefited from connecting to my queer elders. A lot of them had survived really the heart of the HIV/AIDS crisis in our country, where they were threatened not only with their physical health and safety, but their ability to find love, to succeed professionally, and to thrive. And I just soaked in knowledge and wisdom from them as much as I could. Although I will say there were times I felt like I had to reject the lessons they were giving me. I remember sitting on a panel of what to do as a Harvard medical student when you're applying to residency, of whether or not you should be out on your residency application. I was sitting there having fought for, the last decade to be out, and the idea that someone would tell me to go back in the closet so that I could match in dermatology in Alabama was really abhorrent to me. And I think that's a really interesting thing about being a queer person during a time when every 10 years, it's a totally, the landscape shifts all around us about what it means to be queer and the challenges we're facing. Our elders, they have really valuable lessons, but they also learned them for a specific time and context. So one tip I would give is learn from them and also question the things that you're taught. They might not all apply to your situation or to the current state of play. I think about where we all stand on this spectrum of kind of knowing that our community needs to fight back, but it's all taking account of what kind of fight we have in us at the time. One thing that I loved about the New York Times covering Dr. Poussant's passing is they included a picture of him where he was participating in the march from Selma to Montgomery in the 60s. And he has a briefcase full of medical supplies because he knew that that was his role in that march, that he had medical training, and that he could bring that kind of care to the other marchers, and that he could just by standing, not reaching beyond who he was, but standing in what he was trained to do and what he knew, he was able to be a valuable part of that movement. And I think that's so valuable to each of us as we think about where we can participate in this current fight that we have in front of us. When I think about this spectrum of where we're all at, I think about my patients and some of their stories that I've been hearing coming in over the last few months. I have patients who really their fight is just to survive right now. They're facing heartbreaking decisions. I have patients facing, can I continue to be a parent for my kid if that means I have to move back to the South into a place where I might not be able to get gender affirming care? I have patients considering going back to homelessness because their government subsidized housing that they waited for years to get has become a non-affirming place from the people living around them. And they felt actually more affirmed when they were homeless on the streets of Boston. We have people in this meeting who I'm sure are facing similar questions and decisions. Can I seek a really competitive residency spot if I know that that's going to give me less geographic choice about where I end up practicing for the next 4 to 5 to 6 years of my life? Things like, am I going to be able to receive my own health care in the next 5 years that will allow me to be a healthcare provider for others? These are really heartbreaking choices and thoughts that we haven't had to deal with for a long time. When we come together as a community, I think it's really important that we respect what each person is bringing to that table and to the fight, and realize that if someone's in a different spot than you, it's probably because they have a different circumstance that they're responding to. I think about the teachings of Marilyn Frye. Marilyn Frye is a queer sociologist from the University of Chicago. She taught about the double bind of oppression. The double bind of oppression is when we're constantly put in situations in which our options are reduced to very few, and all of them expose us to penalty, censure, or deprivation. Essentially, being oppressed means you have very few options and they all suck. The point is to implicate you in your own oppression, to act as if your choice between these mutually crappy options implicates you in your negative experience moving forward. I often will work through this with my patients. What choice did you really have here? Do you really deserve to feel accountable for this oppression that you're experiencing? Or was this an inevitable result of the choices that you were given? My hope in pointing that out is that they don't internalize a sense of blame or guilt about their experience, and that they remain resilient as they look for better options further down the road. We have a lot of double binds facing our community right now. Do we stand up for ourselves and fight for liberation in the social square? Or do we conceal ourselves and work covertly to survive and preserve our energy for a more favorable fight? I like the concept here of thinking about the difference between surrender and retreat. I learned this from my therapist, and now I talk to a lot of my patients about this. So when you back away from a battle, there's kind of 2 ways to do it. A surrender is admitting that you've failed. A surrender is saying, I'm not up to this battle and I've been beaten. And you carry that sense with you throughout your life to every new battle that you take, the fact that you had to surrender in that moment. A retreat is different. A retreat is looking at the circumstances of the battle and deciding, do I have the energy and resources to win here? A retreat is strategic. It's holding on to your energy and your resources for a more favorable set of circumstances. And in your head, you're still fighting. I think a lot of us might need to retreat from certain points that we once thought were essential battles for us. And when you're faced with that kind of decision, I think it's important to be honest with yourself in those moments about what you're doing and have a clear sense of purpose about how your action actually is aligning with your values of fighting at another time. There were some amazing questions submitted before. I wish I could get to all of them, but they really highlighted the spectrum. Some people are here to fight, and we love that. We need you. We want you fighting. We want to fight alongside you. Some people are here just trying to figure out how to survive, and we love and respect you as well. And you just surviving will give us, valuable insight, resources, and a cause for our own fight as we move forward. There's one question I really did want to address. How do I respond to pity from non-queer coworkers? This one really lit up my brain. I wanted to address it head on. I think it's so important to think about what falls flat with pity. Pity is a very othering emotion. It's only half of empathy. It doesn't put yourself in the other's shoes. And pity is never absorbing pity from others is not a way to actually win your battle most of the time. I think the best way to respond to non-queer coworkers who are offering only pity is to remind them that this is their fight too. One way that we conceive of the current backlash against the queer community is that it's a reaction from non-queer people. It's a reaction formation against the unease caused by queer liberation, which produces in non-queer people their own sense of sexual and gender possibility. Queer liberation has liberated all people in terms of what they think of in the possibility of their lives, their self-expression, their sexuality. And that also has led to dis-ease about that possibility, especially for people who haven't chosen to pursue those options. It's still a cage, even if the cage comes with job promotions and tax write-offs and an honored seat at your family reunion, you're still limited in how much you can express of the different parts of yourself. And the more we can get our non-queer allies to see that, I think the better. Finally, I just want to point out, if we can share the slide on some tips for resilience, I want to highlight a few of them. So we've already covered that you need to connect with community. You're here, you're doing it, keep it up. It's a really important thing. Dan Savage said, during the darkest days of the AIDS crisis, we buried our friends in the morning, we protested in the afternoon, and we danced all night. And we didn't skip the dance because the dance was the point. That was the thing we were fighting for. We don't all love dancing. It could be, you do Dungeons and Dragons at night, whatever it is, but make sure that you're doing the thing that brings you joy and helps you connect with the community. I also want to highlight the maintaining your sense of pride right at the end. Remember that being queer has freed you from traps of societal expectation and gender and sexual scripts that offer you protection initially when things are uncertain, but ultimately can inhibit a fullness of your joy and your expression to the world. It really is a valuable thing to be queer. It leads to a lot of hardship when you're young. Often we don't share this minority identity with our parents. We don't have great models of how to navigate it. But queer people who make it through this time are very strong and have brilliance and creativity as they move forward and face other challenges in lives. They have a fullness of joy, a flagrant joy that's not possible if you don't experience those types of oppressions as a young person. And we should really value that and hold on to it and seek to foster it in ourselves and in others. Thank you so much for this time. I'm going to pass it over to my favorite queer elder. He's going to hit me for saying that later, Dr. Cecil Webster.
Yes, I might hit you for that later. We don't condone violence here, but I will say Dr. Krall's words are really important. there are so many ways in which we all work together trying to better the lives of our patients, of ourselves, of our neighbors. And we can oftentimes get lost in that mix, of course. So Dr. Costner and Dr. Kroll have done a great job of outlining the ways in which we are vulnerable at times and where the softness in us like can really be at risk. And also with Dr. Kroll, like this is an important thing to highlight. This is not unprecedented, but it is new to many of us. Um, I I will say I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I often think about history, what happens younger, influencing what happens when we get older. I'm also a psychoanalyst, which is very much the same thing about like how our pasts influence our present. And also, I'm a gay person and a Black person and an American, and each of those things also informs how I look at problems, how I look at strengths, how I look at present moments and future ones. So there are a few things that I would like to say to round out many of the other things that we've heard and had the pleasure of hearing today. First and foremost, both clinically and personally, the thing that I always like to emphasize for people is never worry alone. I had a really awesome supervisor when I was a psychiatry trainee years ago. I was like struggling with some patients and I couldn't figure something out. And he was like, well, Cecil, you don't have to worry alone about that. Don't worry alone. And those words have actually, wildly out of context of what we're discussing today, have really allowed me a different view of like managing large problems. Like I can't emphasize this enough. Many of us have been very good and successful, brilliant even at operating within a relative degree of independence and in our work academically, maybe to some degree socially. And many of us, for many of us, this comes from a place of like having to hide parts of ourselves and like being good enough, like the Velvet Rage sort of model. And some of you are familiar with that. But at minimum, like having to be really perfect at something because we feel like parts of ourselves are imperfect. And myself included, like I also have my own degrees of feeling like I can operate independently. Recently, myself and a like beloved colleague of mine who's older than I am, also an elder, I'm not quite sure how to say that, but in any case, we were putting something together for a conference. And we do the same workshop every year in child psychiatry around how to talk about sexuality and gender and sensuality with children, with kids, with adolescents, children, etc. And this time was different. We wrote this maybe a couple of weeks ago. This is in the throes of like a tremendous amount of executive orders in the U.S. And I turned to my colleague and I said, you know, I'm not really used to doing this work in a subversive, quiet way. And she said, like, well, I am. And we're going to rely on my skill a bit and my own experience to help us through this as best we can. So we changed some language, and it's just really interesting the ways in which I think everybody has highlighted. It's like looking back, relying on those that have come before us as a really important way or mechanism, strategy to do well in this present moment, just not just survive. In addition, more broadly speaking, many of us have a tremendous variety of people in our lives that we get to share so much with, but we don't often share the things that are really hard about our present lives. I always encourage people, and again, like this is something I try to do very purposefully. I always encourage people to be connected with people in their lives. A text message is fine. An Instagram DM commenting on some story is okay. Our evidence suggests, however, like spending time with people face to face can do a tremendous amount in us feeling grounded, less anxious, less depressed. And I think this is especially one of those moments. Reading up on things is quite nice, but talking to people is fundamentally better. That building and that maintaining of a living community is going to be increasingly important. And also being sure, of course, to like look back at our previous communities and how they've done it before. The second thing that I would like to say, and this is often more focused on patients versus ourselves, I think sometimes we do a fair enough job doing this for ourselves, but acknowledging the impact of, or like what's going on right now, like the impact of a moment. We can, by the water cooler or in the room where we do our notes or in the corridors, we can lament about certain changes in laws. We can talk about the ways in which something has been withdrawn. But our patients also need that acknowledgement. It can be a bit crazy making to like hear all the things on the news, but the clinician with whom you are poised to be in like an intimate relationship with clinically, like if they're not acknowledging that, that can be really difficult to navigate. Like there have been a lot of chaotic shifts. Acknowledging those chaotic shifts can be wildly vital. I often tell my patients, like, it's like, listen, yeah, you do have reasons to be worried. I have reasons to be worried. I think it might be tempting to dismiss these things, but yeah, maybe you do get your passport renewed. Actually, that was something I mentioned just last month, and that was quite prescient. But there are all these ways in which we can acknowledge in a very basic way what the struggles are in our world. People are worried about being harmed and harassed. In a world where like more of that is acceptable, we really need to acknowledge the impact on our patients, but also acknowledge the impact on ourselves. I loved Dr. Krall's suggestion of like strategic retreat. Um, this is going to make more sense in a bit. I have a 3-year-old. I love my 3-year-old. He is difficult. We are going through potty training right now, and it's a very difficult time. And I in the middle of the night when he was yelling and screaming with a wet diaper or wet underwear, I should say, I said to my husband, I'm like, okay, I can't do this right now. Can you get this? And he's like, I have you. I got you, Cecil. Let me go take care of it. I felt really bad in that moment. Also, I'm not really great in the middle of the night. He's much better at that. But there are important ways in which we have to retreat for a moment in order to come back in a more strengthened way. Potty training aside, of course, like there are going to be people that are really good at taking up this present moment legally, financially, clinically, like writing, of course. And there are others of us that might need to take some time in order to be more strategic about the ways in which we can contribute. Similar with Dr. Poussin, like there were ways in which like he did a really good job of offering the things that he could in beautiful ways over long periods of time. And the last thing that I will also offer here is that we should really consider the long view. This might seem like the world is like come wildly apart and it'll never be better and that this is wildly difficult, but we've been here before. What can we do today to better the next 100 years? How can we contribute to something for 100 years from now? People will be like, oh, that was a small, meaningful impact. That might be conversations with your colleagues about what's going on. It might be a quiet moment with your patients, but all of those things impact one another and can create much bigger things than we could ever do alone. So thinking about just the next 2 weeks can be maddening. Thinking about which ways you can contribute over the next 100 years can be really, very important. If you need to take some time off, do that, of course. But fortunately, each of us is in a very different moment internally about what we can do, what our capacities are, and acknowledging that for ourselves is vital. We have come from a long line of people that have survived far worse than this. We are in better circumstances. We have a greater knowledge about these things. I will often say that I often lean on my psychoanalytic understandings of things, like Dr. Krall mentioned, reaction formation, projection, scapegoating, like all of those things are reflections of other people and not necessarily reflections of our worth and our ability. We are flexible and creative and fun and unbounded. And if we can keep that as our North Star, I think many of us will not just survive these moments, but help each other thrive more generally. So I appreciate being a part of this, and I can't wait to hear from other people about their thoughts and questions, of course, too.
What a great discussion. I just mentioned to Alex in the chat that I felt so much calmer just hearing from our three amazing panelists in their presentations. I'll turn it over to you, Alex, first for questions, and then we'll try and work through some of the questions that are in the chat. For those that are in the audience, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, and I will bring those up live to our various presenters. But Alex, I'll turn to you first.
Thank you so much, Alden, and Chelsea, Carrie, Cecil. That was really beautifully done. I'm so inspired and soothed, and you gave me so much food for thought. So thank you to each of you. And I'll start by asking one question in the Q&A that I thought was interesting, and this is specifically for Chelsea, and I think it'd be helpful. The attendee asked, I hadn't heard terms like accomplice and co-conspirator used in this context before. Don't these terms have a negative connotation? Are those connotations being invoked intentionally?
Yeah, I think these are terms that have sort of been used to speak more about how we can be on journeys with other people and sort of plans to work with others for a goal. So in supporting, if we're not necessarily identifying as trans or identifying as part of the greater LGBTQIA plus community, we might talk about being an ally, and instead of being an ally where we're sort of more tacitly giving support and showing up in smaller ways, like, I had mentioned like stickers that might show a pride flag, things like that. Taking a step beyond that and sort of thinking about, okay, what does it mean to really take steps beyond just allyship? And this is where I think people have conceptualized more of being an accomplice or co-conspirator in more of these positive ways. And I don't know if Cecil or Carrie, you wanted to comment more on that, but that's sort of where I've learned about these terms and heard them used, and more from Black scholars or other queer scholars who have invoked those terms and more of the organizing capacity.
Great, yeah. I like these terms in this context because it acknowledges, or these terms acknowledge, that we're operating within a system that's against us. So it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but the implication is that we're collaborating on something that is subversive of the mainstream that's against us, right? So I think it's a helpful in-community connotation. But Cecil, Carrie, I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Cecil, you take it away.
Language is an interesting thing. I think sometimes there can be a focus on making sure that language is like very neutral. And I will say, psychoanalysis has a lot of emphasis on this as well, like the point of view of the world, like having language be fairly neutral. But honestly, I'm not sure that it needs to be. Like we are literally having a question about what this word means, and that it is negative or not, I think might also serve its purpose of having people question the ways in which they are a part of something, and that can be in welcome or unwelcome ways. I honestly, I don't really see so much of a problem with it. I do think I agree with Dr. Kurilian. It is a little tongue in cheek. Like obviously, people are not going out here like intentionally harming other people, but there are ways in which we might be surprised by the ways in which we allow harm to occur. So I think it's a fair word. I don't own it. It's not mine per se. But I do think it has a place, much like many other things. Many other words also have places in helping us think more critically, more deeply, in a more nuanced, complex way about how to solve problems.
Great, thank you. Go to another one of our questions here. Thank you to all these amazing speakers. I have a child who's non-binary. They're 11 years old, and I feel like I'm having to fight the fight for them in terms of school and sports. We now have non-gendered restrooms, but that's really the bare minimum. Do you have any suggestions for parents of preteens and teenagers in the LGBTQ community? It's so scary right now. Well, we have two child and adolescent psychiatrists here, and I know Carrie thinks a lot about youth in the community as well. So maybe we can start with our child and adolescent specialist here.
Yeah, I know it can be a really scary time for parents. I think finding support for yourself, I think, some of the resources I shared earlier, like PFLAG, can be a really great resource for parents, particularly getting connected to other parents who might be struggling with some of the other questions that might be going around about what school supports might look like, just questions about navigating possible transitions as your kiddo is growing up. So I think that might be a good place to start. And also not trying to be too proactive in uh, getting them more frightened. There's a lot of uncertainty still. So just sort of modeling that, things might be scary, you might be hearing things, but not trying to be more worried than they are, sort of letting your kid show you how they're showing up, not getting too overly protective for them, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In a less, I guess in a more human to human way, I think oftentimes we feel really alone. Like we're faced with a big challenge. It's like, oh, I don't know what to do. No one is really aware or is able to help. Like this is often a place that gets us really stuck. I'm sorry to hear that that your non-binary child is having some trouble, and I'm worried to hear like the relative isolation. But please know, you are not alone. Like my office is full of parents for whom this is like the question right now. Schools are faced with pressure from sort of federal level. Schools are in funding, and schools are faced with like a cultural pressure of like, hey, this is something that we feel like is important as a community to support these children, our children. So you're not alone in that way. I often find that parents, when they connect with other parents that are in a similar circumstance, it can be really grounding, far more orienting. It can be like a big anchor, and you can like exchange like the granular ways in which each of you has had to navigate something. On a very basic level, having kids have parents for whom they think are acting in their best interests and holding them in mind in a very basic way is one of the most protective factors for all sorts of things later on in life. So you're already on the right track. So that's good. And I also would agree that like, you don't have to do too much in the ways of like perfectly cosseting this kid, like never to actually like know what the world is and what's happening around them. But also, as these kids are generally aware of some of the animus that's out there, helping them understand that it's not theirs. It's a reflection of something that's happening well outside of themselves. They're unfortunately caught up in something that has nothing to do with their personhood or their capacities or their loveliness. Like, if you can emphasize that, that can actually be quite protective in the same ways, if not more, than having a bathroom where they can feel comfortable too.
So I have a question that I want to pose to the panel because I think this has been a great discussion. But one of the things that I have sort of been contemplating is when we are in these discussions, when we're having these conversations, it often focuses on the individual or the community having to take on the onus of all of these burdens. And I would love to hear what your thoughts are, or if you can tell us examples even in spite of everything that's happening within sort of this social political discussion that we're having right now, of ways that institutions, whether it be your department or your hospital or a city or a state, is supporting these marginalized communities that we're talking about, specifically here talking about the LGBTQIA plus community, but ways that organizations or institutions are supporting their constituents, their employees, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial question. There's a question in the chat that hasn't been answered yet from someone who says, "Hey, I've been organizing these LGBT events for forever. It feels like it's such hard work and so much of an effort on my part, and I don't know if I'm making a difference here." And that's really resonates with me. A lot of my experience in med school was spent kind of doing this kind of extracurricular stuff that wasn't compensated or supported and was at, there was an opportunity cost against my other duties as a medical student. there's this concept of a minority tax where the group that is already facing the pressure, it's put the obligation to educate, to fight back is placed on that group. And that makes everyone in the bigger circle feel like, okay, we're doing it. We have the LGBT student group, we have the race and medicine group, but really it's just those groups are taking on those fights. I think it's a really important thing for us to think about how we hold our institutions accountable for obligations and commitments they made to the queer community when it was politically popular to do so, at a time when that may be shifting. I think on my end, I was asked by one of the big health plans in Massachusetts to speak at their Pride event last year. And really, we were highlighting everything that health plan was doing for their trans patients to make sure that they had access to gender affirming care. And the first thing I did when the executive orders came down is I emailed them and I said, I cannot wait for next year's presentation. I have so many things I'd like to add. I know that you're going to be just as excited as I am to really provide an important voice to the patients and the HR people that you're supporting. Like, let's do this. I actually think we should bring in a lawyer. These are the things I'm hearing. That email, it came alive. It took like a day to get a response, but people need to be challenged and they need to be watching, and that they can't just ignore the relationship that they built with you in a time when it may have been more convenient. And to this health plan's, it's a really good health plan that's very supportive in general, but I think it would be easier for them to let that kind of slip away if we don't hold them accountable and show up. And if you're in a position to do that, this is the time to do it.
And I think private nonprofit academic medical centers and the like are actually under more pressure than a private health plan would be to acquiesce. So I think what you described, which I loved, Carrie, I was smiling ear to ear when you told that story, even more important in some of the settings we work in that are very dependent on federal funding in a way a private health plan probably isn't. Well, oh, go ahead. Please, Alden, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off,
No,
Alex.
no, please.
One of the conversations that I think also came to light, and I know this is a long question and would require a long answer, but we have just a few minutes left. So maybe just someone can comment about the fact that many of us wear multiple identities, and it's important for us to recognize all of our identities in the spaces. Cecil, you mentioned this. I think Chelsea, you mentioned this as well. I would love to hear your thoughts on sort of bringing your true self to work, representing all of those identities, and also figuring out how to gauge when it's what's the best approach to doing so, in especially in a place where we can experience toxicity by being our true selves.
Ooh, okay. So easy question at the very end. Thank you, Dr. Landry. So yeah, you're talking about intersectionality, like the ways in which our like closely held identities might compound with one another in like new, novel, I guess that's redundant, ways for either added benefit or different marginalizations. That was an idea offered by Kimberly Crenshaw back in the 80s, I believe. She's a lawyer. This is not something that came from medicine. And it's a really good way of thinking about the ways in which these individual parts of ourselves, let's say like our femininity and our Blackness, might come together to have a specific reaction in an organization or a company or something like that. Or let's say in school, like Black girls we know are expelled at much higher rates than other groups in that educational setting. It can be really hard. I think oftentimes I think particularly in our groups that are probably listening today, we've been very skilled at managing and navigating organizations by hiding parts of ourselves, hiding parts of our Blackness, hiding parts of our Asianness, hiding parts of our gayness, whatever it might be, in order to be palatable and acceptable, and so people can focus on other aspects of their work. I think in some ways that might lead us to be successful, and in other ways it really does us a disservice because we have to leave parts of ourselves behind. I do my best to bring all my Blackness, all my gayness, all those sorts of things that I have a lot of pride in, into the spaces that I occupy. It's a part of my thinking. It's a part of how I interact with people. It does require some risk. How do we have ourselves? How do we push ourselves to have risk enough that we're not going to be destitute on the streets, but at the same time risk enough to challenge people to be a bit wider in what they allow for their spaces to be occupied with. I will walk into a psychoanalytic space. I'm going to make references to Beyonce and dare somebody not to keep up, right? Like it's okay, like this is who we are. We can bring those parts of ourselves. Other people need to like stretch themselves well enough. And if they can't, then we need to be a part of places that can.
Thank you for such a succinct answer to admittedly a tough question. We are at time, and I want to say first thank you to Alex for helping to pull together this amazing group of panelists and to helping us shape this discussion that we just had over the past hour. I want to say thank you to Carrie, Chelsea, and Cecil for your amazing presentations. Again, the comments that are popping up in the Q&A have all been very much of this has been an uplifting experience and an amazing conversation. So thank you for that. I want to also say thank you to Robin and Lynn in the background for helping us pull this together. There will be a short survey sent to you following the webinar. We would appreciate if you could fill that out. We have future webinars coming up. Our theme this year has been on mental health and well-being. Our next topic that we're planning a discussion on will be about student and trainee health, well-being, and resilience. And we will have more information about that event coming up in mid-April. And again, thank you all for your time for being here. And thank you once again to our moderator and our panelists for being here. And everyone have a good rest of your day.